I didn't just love her. I built my whole life around her, and I mean that in the most literal sense. I was 24 when I met Maya. It was 2013, late summer in Columbus, Ohio, at a mutual friend's going-away party in someone's backyard. She was standing near the back fence talking to people I half knew, and she had this way of laughing where she'd cover her mouth with two fingers like she was trying to hold it in. I don't know why that detail stuck with me. It just did. We talked for 3 hours that night while everyone else filtered inside. By the time I drove home, something had already shifted. We dated 2 years before moving in together. That was 2015. A 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building in Clintonville, older place, radiator heat, a kitchen window that faced east and pulled in clean morning light. I remember the first week there, unpacking boxes with bad pizza on the counter, thinking this was the version of my life I wanted to hold on to. It's a strange thing to feel that certain at 26, but I did. We merged everything gradually, then all at once, the way those things tend to go. Joint account for rent and groceries by the end of our first year living together. Her name on my emergency contact form at work. My number saved as home in her phone. I saw it once when she asked me to check a text for her, and I remember smiling at it like an idiot. Our friend groups had stopped being separate long before we moved in. Saturday dinners at Daniel and Priya's in Short North. New Year's Eve at her sister's house in Westerville, where I always ended up doing dishes with her dad Gary, a quiet man who liked the same teams I did and hated the same noise. Her coworkers knew my name. My brother called her his sister-in-law even though we weren't engaged. The word "yet" just floated in the air between us, like something we'd agreed to without saying out loud. I had the ring for 4 months before everything fell apart. I bought it from a small jeweler on High Street, nothing extravagant. She had said once, years before, that she hated anything flashy, and I'd filed that away the way you file things away when you're actually paying attention to someone. Simple gold band, small stone. I kept it in the toe of a dress sock pushed to the back of my top dresser drawer. Sometimes on weekends, if she was in the shower or out running errands, I'd take it out and hold it for a moment. Not dramatic, just something I did. I was 32 years old and I had never been more certain of anything. Looking back at that version of myself, the guy standing in that bedroom, holding a ring he hadn't given yet, I almost don't recognize him. He feels like a different person who just happened to wear my face. The last night I remember as genuinely normal was a Tuesday in October 2022. She made pasta, the simple kind, garlic and olive oil, the one she'd been making since we first started dating. We ate on the couch watching some crime documentary she'd picked, something I couldn't name now if I tried. Halfway through, she fell asleep with her head against my shoulder. I reached over and turned the lamp off without moving so I wouldn't wake her. The radiator ticked. The TV glowed on mute. I remember the specific weight of that moment and thinking, this is good, this is steady, we're fine. I had no idea the life I believed I was living had already quietly begun to end. The first sign was so small that even now telling it I feel a little embarrassed, because on its own it meant nothing. She started keeping her phone face down. That was it. Not an argument, not a lie I could point to, just the phone placed screen side down on the coffee table, the kitchen counter, the nightstand. I noticed it once in November and thought nothing of it. Noticed it a second time and moved on. By the 4th or 5th time there was this low, dull awareness in me that I kept choosing not to examine. I'd always been good at not borrowing trouble. Then her schedule shifted. She was staying late at work too, sometimes 3 nights a week. She worked at a small nonprofit doing housing advocacy. It wasn't unusual for things to get hectic around grant season. But when she'd come home around 9, sometimes later, the tired she brought with her felt different. There's a tired that softens a person when they walk through the door, and there's a tired that stiffens them. This was the second kind. She needed space. She needed quiet. I asked once casually if everything was okay at work. She said yes, just this grant application almost done. I made her tea and left her alone. That was November into December. The emotional distance arrived the way it always does, gradually enough that you keep explaining it away. She stopped texting me the small things during the day. The funny thing she saw, the complaint about the commute. We'd sit in the living room on a weeknight and the conversation would run dry by 8 and neither of us would try to restart it. I told myself this was just what long relationships looked like sometimes. I told myself we were comfortable. I told myself almost everything except the thing I was actually afraid to consider. My friend Joel was the one who nudged it. We got coffee at a place near his apartment in Italian Village one Thursday morning, and we were mid-conversation about something else entirely when he paused and looked at me and said, "Hey, is everything good with you and Maya?" Not prying. Careful. The way someone asks when they've already decided how much to say. I said, "Yeah, why?" He shrugged and said he'd seen her out a few weeks earlier, a bar in Short North on a Wednesday night with people he didn't recognize. Said it seemed strange she hadn't mentioned it. I laughed it off, said she probably went with work people. He nodded and dropped it. I dropped it too. Filed it away with the face-down phone and the stiff tiredness. Put the lid on and walked away. 2 weeks after that coffee, she came home on a Friday and she was different. Lighter. Genuinely lighter, the tension behind her eyes gone, something easy about her that I hadn't seen in months. She kissed me on the cheek and asked what I wanted for dinner, and we ordered Thai and talked more than we had in weeks. I lay in bed that night actually feeling relieved, thinking we were coming back to each other, thinking it was going to be okay. I had no idea where she'd been before she came home that night. It would be another 2 months before I did. I wasn't looking for anything. I need to say that clearly because it matters to me. It was a Sunday afternoon in February. I was doing laundry the way I did every couple of weeks, emptying pockets before loading the machine because I'd ruined too many things leaving stuff in them. Her gray jacket was in the pile. I reached into the front pocket and pulled out a folded receipt. I looked at it because that's what you do. It was from a restaurant in Dublin about 40 minutes from our apartment. Dinner for 2. A bottle of wine. A Wednesday night in late November. The same Wednesday Joel had mentioned seeing her out. The same Wednesday she had texted me, "Don't wait up, it's going to be a long one." I had eaten leftover pasta alone at the kitchen counter and gone to bed before 10. I stood in the laundry area holding that receipt while the washing machine filled with water. I stood there until it stopped. I put the receipt in my own pocket, finished loading the laundry, didn't say a word. That week I started paying attention differently. I wasn't obsessive about it. I wasn't going through her things or tracking her location. I just stopped actively not looking, which is its own thing entirely. And when I stopped not looking, the picture that came into focus was already fully assembled. I just hadn't been willing to see it. Her phone was now fully silenced at all times. Not just face down, screen dark, no vibration, tucked into her jacket pocket the moment she got home. She angled away when she typed. She took calls in the bedroom with the door half closed. Once I walked into the kitchen while she was on the phone by the window and she said, "I'll call you back," before I'd even cleared the doorway. I asked who it was. She said a friend from work. I asked which one. She said the name Steph half a second too fast, like it had been waiting. The notification came about 10 days after the receipt. I was at the counter making coffee. Her phone was maybe 4 feet away and it buzzed, screen lighting up with a message preview. I didn't pick it up. I read it from where I was standing. The name wasn't Steph. The 2 sentences on that screen made the entire context clear. I turned and looked out the kitchen window at the parking lot below. A thin layer of snow on the cars from the night before. A neighbor scraping his windshield. Everything exactly as it should be on a normal morning. I'm not going to tell you I didn't feel anything. I felt everything all at once, like every rationalization I'd built over months collapsed in under 3 seconds. But beneath the sick, dropping feeling, something else was rising. Quiet, cold, focused. I started going back through everything I'd dismissed. The face-down phone, the late Wednesdays, the glowing Friday, the receipt, the silenced notifications. The name said too fast. I stopped dismissing and started assembling, built a timeline instead of tearing one down. And what it showed me was that this had been running since September. It was now February. The betrayal wasn't a moment, it was a project, built slowly, deliberately while I was standing in the same rooms. The ring was still in the sock at the back of my dresser drawer. I walked past it that Sunday and just let that fact exist. I didn't open the drawer. I didn't confront her that week, or the next. I just understood something I hadn't before. She didn't know I knew. And for the first time in months, I held something in this relationship that she didn't. I chose a Saturday morning in early March. She had nowhere to be until the afternoon. She was in the kitchen when I came out, standing at the counter in her robe with her coffee, scrolling her phone. A normal morning. I made my coffee, didn't rush it, sat down at the table. Then I unfolded the receipt. I'd kept it in my coat pocket for 3 weeks and placed it face up between us without saying a word. She looked at it, then at me. In that half second before she spoke, I watched her cycle through several versions of what to say. She went with deflection, said it was a work team thing, said I was reading into it, said she was tired of feeling like I didn't trust her. I let her finish everything. Then I told her about the notification on her phone, the name, what the message said. I didn't raise my voice, just stated it flat. The deflection stopped. What replaced it wasn't remorse. It was a kind of cold recalibration, like she was deciding in real time how much to admit and how to shape it. She told me it had been going on since September, 5 months. I did the math without meaning to. Thought about every meal I'd cooked, every night I'd waited up, every Sunday morning I'd reached for her half asleep. 5 months of that, running alongside something I knew nothing about. I asked her once, just once, whether she'd ever thought about ending it with him and coming back. She looked at me and said quietly that by the time she was asking herself that question, she already had her answer. Then she said the thing that changed the temperature of the entire room. She told me she had already moved in with him, 2 weeks ago. I remember the refrigerator hum, my coffee going cold. I asked what that meant for our apartment, both our names on the lease. She said she assumed I'd figure it out. Said it the way you say something you've already removed from your mental to-do list. I didn't yell. I didn't reach for the things I'd imagined saying. I looked at her, the person whose voicemail I'd saved because it made me feel loved, whose dad I did dishes with every New Year's, for whom I had a ring sitting 20 feet away in my dresser drawer, and I felt something I was entirely unprepared for. Nothing. Not numbness, something more deliberate than that. A door not slamming, just quietly swinging shut. She kept talking. I stopped tracking the words. I watched her speak, and somewhere in those minutes I made a decision I didn't announce and didn't explain to myself or to her. She left about an hour later to pick up, as she put it, some things from the place she already lived with someone else. I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened the notes app on my phone, not to write what I wanted to say, to write what I needed to do. She expected me to call. I know this because she told me so much later. She expected the check-in text, the "can we talk?" the slow back and forth where one person reaches and the other withholds before eventually softening. She'd seen that pattern before. She thought she knew how I worked. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't reach out once. The first thing I did was contact the landlord on Monday, explained the situation without detail, asked about transferring the lease to my name alone. Some paperwork, a processing fee, a week of back and forth, but within 10 days her name was off it. The apartment was mine. Singular. The joint bank account I handled the following week. Went into the branch in person, separated everything cleanly, transferred my half, closed the shared account. No drama, no warning message beforehand. Just process executed quietly. Over the next couple of weeks I went through the apartment and boxed her remaining things. Not in anger, methodically. Books from the hallway shelf. The cast iron pan she'd had since before we met. A framed print her mother had given her. I packed everything carefully, sealed the boxes, and sent her one message, the only message I sent her during that entire period, with a date and a 2-hour window to collect them. Then I went back to silence. She came and got the boxes. I made sure I wasn't home. Around the 3rd week, mutual friends started checking in. Confused, not accusatory, just wondering why I'd gone quiet and whether I was okay. I kept responses short. Said I was fine. I didn't explain, didn't campaign for sympathy, didn't ask anyone to take sides. I simply withdrew from the shared spaces we'd occupied together and let the social geometry rearrange itself without my input. Even then, I understood what she needed. People who do what she did always need a story, a version of events where they're not the obvious villain, where there's enough ambiguity for sympathy to find a foothold. That story only works if the other person is visible, reactive, emotional, someone to point at. I stopped being something she could point at. By the second month, I was getting up at 5 in the morning and going to the gym before work. Not for any dramatic reason, I just needed somewhere to put the energy that woke me up at that hour anyway. I picked up a project at work I'd been deferring for months. I called my brother more often. On weekends, I started cooking properly again instead of eating over the sink. Small routines, entirely and uncomplicatedly mine, rebuilt one at a time. I didn't post any of it. No vague lyrics in the bio. No pointed captions. No new profile photos signaling that I was thriving. As far as anyone looking could tell, I had simply gone quiet. And I knew, because 9 years of knowing her had taught me exactly this, that for someone like Maya, silence from a person who should by every reasonable expectation be falling apart is the most disorienting thing in the world. The first message came in July, 4 months after that Saturday morning in the kitchen. Short, almost casual. Hey, hope you're doing okay. No context, no explanation for why 4 months of nothing had ended with a wellness check. I read it once, set my phone face down on the coffee table, the irony not lost on me, and went back to what I was doing. 2 weeks later, another message, longer. She said she'd found a few things of mine and could she drop them off. There was nothing of mine at her place. Everything I owned was here where I had been the whole time. I didn't respond. The phone call came on a Wednesday evening in August. I was on the couch reading. I saw her name on the screen and sat with it for a few seconds before I picked up. I can't fully explain why I did. Maybe I was ready. Maybe some part of me knew this was the conversation that needed to happen before I could close the door completely. She'd left him, or he'd ended it. She was vague about which, and that vagueness told me exactly which version was harder to say out loud. 3 months. 9 years of what we built together, set aside for something that lasted 3 months. The call started carefully. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, that she had things she needed to say. I told her I was listening, and I meant it, not warmly, but completely. I was paying the kind of attention you pay when you know you'll need to remember exactly what was said. What came next was something I hadn't fully prepared myself for, even though I probably should have. She began explaining why the relationship had failed, not what she had done, what we had been. In her account, I had become emotionally unavailable in the last 2 years. I had stopped making her feel like a priority. I was too focused on work, too in my own head too, and she used this word twice, checked out. She said she wasn't trying to justify anything. She just wanted me to understand the context, the conditions that had led her to where she went. She was rewriting 9 years. Reorganizing the entire story with herself as the person who had been quietly let down and who had, eventually, broken in an understandable direction. I didn't say anything. I let her keep going. She listed specific moments. A birthday in 2021 where she'd felt like an afterthought. A work trip I'd canceled in the spring. Times I'd been distracted or short-tempered or absent in ways she'd apparently never mentioned at the time. Each grievance delivered in a patient, measured tone, rehearsed enough that I could tell she'd been sitting with this list for a while. Maybe she had. Maybe this was the story she'd been building since July, when the new thing started fraying, this retroactive explanation that cast her not as someone who had chosen to betray, but as someone who had been failed into it. I let her finish. All of it. Down to the long pause at the end that she left open, I think, expecting me to step into it. To soften. To start doing the emotional work of making this easier for her. I let the pause sit. When she finally asked quietly if I had anything to say, I told her yes, that I did. I didn't raise my voice once. I told her I'd been listening carefully and that I wanted to respond with the same honesty she just offered me. I spoke slowly. I had thought about this moment not as a revenge fantasy but as a commitment to accuracy. That was all I was going to do, be accurate. I brought up the birthday she referenced, the one where I had apparently made her feel like an afterthought. I reminded her gently, without rushing it, that my father had been admitted to Riverside Hospital that weekend with what the doctors were then calling a possible cardiac event, that she had been there. She had driven with me and sat in that waiting room for 4 hours and held my hand in the elevator. I said I remembered her being there because I had been grateful for it. I let the silence that followed do what it needed to do. I brought up the canceled trip, The work crisis that pulled me back, 2 people on my team were at risk of losing their jobs, and I stayed and they didn't lose them. She had called me that night to say she understood. She had said exactly those words. I still had that voicemail, not because I had been building a file, but because at the time it had made me feel like she was on my side. I walked through 3 more of her examples the same way. Not all of them, just enough. Each one returned to her with its full context restored, the context she had quietly edited out when she filed it into her version of events. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I was just putting the complete picture in front of her and letting her see what she'd removed. Then I stopped talking about the past entirely. I told her that after she left I had genuinely tried to find where I'd failed. Not to punish myself, but because I believe in being honest with yourself. And I found things. I'm not a perfect person. There were ways I could have been more present, more open, more attuned, and I acknowledged those because they were real. But what I did not find anywhere in 9 years was a reason. Not a real one. Because there is no version of I felt unseen sometimes that becomes justification for what she did and the way she did it. Not in secret. Not over 5 months. Not while I was making her coffee in the mornings and keeping a ring in my drawer because I was certain about her. She had taken something from me she couldn't return. Not the relationship, the chance to respond. The one honest conversation she owed me before any of it happened. She had decided quietly that I didn't get that. And I needed her to hear me say that out loud. I told her I didn't hate her. I meant it. I told her I didn't need an apology. Not because I had forgiven everything and made peace with it, but because somewhere around the 3rd or 4th month after she left I had noticed something. My life had become measurably better. Not dramatically, no triumphant new chapter, just cleaner, quieter, more mine. The clarity I had gained about myself, about what I was willing to carry forward, I couldn't have found that any other way. She had done me real damage, and the damage had opened something I hadn't known needed opening. Then I said the thing I hadn't planned to say but knew once I got there was the truest thing I had. I told her I didn't think about her anymore, not as a performance. Not to hurt her, I meant it literally. The space she had occupied in my daily thoughts, that constant low-level presence every long relationship leaves behind, had closed. Not overnight, not dramatically. Just gradually through months of ordinary living. She had become someone who had happened to me. Past tense. Filed. I wished her well. The way you mean it for someone whose life you once shared completely but whose life is no longer something you follow. Then I said goodbye and ended the call. I went through my phone and blocked her number, then her email, then every account one by one, not in anger, just methodically. The same way I had handled the lease, the bank account, the boxes. One final item on the list. Done. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter, the same counter where I used to make 2 cups of coffee every morning without thinking. The same kitchen with the east-facing window that still flooded with light. I made myself a coffee. 1 cup. I stood there in the quiet of the apartment and drank it, and I didn't think about her once.